Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. It's been a big week for the aviation industry. First, Virgin Australia's CEO Jayne Hrdlicka announced she was stepping down after almost 4 years of rebuilding the airline following the pandemic. But her departure has thrown plans for a potential IPO of the company into disarray. Then Qantas announced a new chair with John Mullen to replace Richard Goyder. On the same day, the government declared it will start auditing slots at Sydney Airport and force the airlines to explain why they've cancelled flights. Then yesterday, Qantas announced its half-year results with a lower profit after the boom result last year and a $400 million share buyback. Plenty to discuss. Jeffrey Thomas is the editor-in-chief of airlineratings.com and I would say the most respected aviation commentator in the country. Jeffrey, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Well, thank you very much for that intro.
Now, I am delighted that you're actually speaking. There's a bit of background noise because you're actually at an airport terminal. Is that right?
Yes, I'm actually at a Qantas terminal. I'm about to take a flight, so yes.
Right. We will hurry this because I'm sure it won't be late. Let's keep talking Qantas. Yesterday's result, it wasn't as high as 12 months ago, but 12 months ago we kind of had that post-COVID boom in travel. They've still got enough cash to be throwing around a $400 million share buyback. What do you take of Vanessa Hudson's first result?
Look, it's a good result. We expected the revenue to decline as capacity has come back into the market and fares have normalised because, last year they were anything but normal, and certainly the year before that. So fares have normalised. They've got a fair way to go, but they've also increased the flying, so the revenue's bumped up as a total, but the yield has gone down. So look, I think it's a result that we sort of expected. It's in line with the predictions from analysts. So I'd give her a tick, and she's spending a lot of money on a lot of initiatives to please the passengers.
Okay, so let's go down that path a bit. She is a very different personality to Alan Joyce, undoubtedly. How would you rate her first 6 months or so, or it's less than 6 months, in the job?
Well, look, it's an interesting point. She is different to Alan Joyce. I think she may be a little bit more willing to compromise. However, having said that, she still has to run a ASX-listed airline facing competition from a lot of airlines that are government-owned or partly government-owned or have labour costs that are up to 1/7 those of Qantas's. So there's lots of challenges for Qantas, particularly in the international arena. And so there's only so many levers that she can pull in her pursuit of charting a different course. And, she's going to be facing a lot of problems with the unions because they're, saying, well, look, Alan's gone, now we can sort of get better pay and conditions. There's not a lot of room for her to move in that regard.
Also, plenty of regulatory scrutiny, I'm guessing, over the next year or two for Qantas and all the airlines.
Look, indeed, and that's one of the big concerns. The issues that have befallen Qantas and Virgin, but Virgin doesn't get the publicity. They've still had the same problems. In fact, they've had worse problems. Those issues are global. All airlines in the world have faced these problems, and some of the airlines are very well heeled through government ownership. Therefore, the problems have been smoothed over to an extent. So, what concerns me is that we may face a whole lot of regulatory changes, a whole lot of knee-jerk reactions to the media coverage of Qantas over the last year or two, and that would be a mistake because these issues are global. For instance, in this result, Vanessa Hudson said the A350, the plane that's going to go from Sydney to New York non-stop, Sydney to London non-stop, Melbourne, London non-stop, that's a really big airplane for them, a big revenue earner for them. It's delayed another 7 months because of supply chain issues affecting Airbus, and they affect Boeing as well. So these issues are not going to go away for another year or so.
Stay with me, Jeffrey. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to aviation commentator Jeffrey Thomas, editor-in-chief of airlineratings.com. Qantas is competing with government-funded airlines on the international routes, and we sort of tend to forget that because it is an ASX-listed company. Virgin is privately held, but it's still trying to make a profit at the end of the day. I sometimes get confused here because certainly Qantas and Virgin get benefits from the government in terms of the open skies policy. This is a question rather than a statement. So it does get some benefit, but then the flip side, which they have argued, and Alan Joyce has argued, is, but it's not a fair playing field because we're, fighting against a bunch of government-backed airlines. Am I kind of right in what I say there?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, Qantas faces competition, say from Virgin Australia, which is 100% American-owned by Bain. Bonza is 100% American-owned. Now, you can't do that in America. You cannot run an airline in America that's 100% Australian-owned. So that's an uneven playing field. Now, the other dynamic, and talking of America, is every American airline that flies into Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane has gone bankrupt over the last 10 or 20 years. And when they go bankrupt, go into Chapter 11, they tear up the contract, the labour contracts, and present a new one. Now, American pilots have lost 40% of their remuneration over the last 20 years because of the bankruptcy of these carriers. So one of the things that they said about Alan Joyce, one of the problems he had was that Qantas has never gone bankrupt. And where you could tear up all the labour contracts and start all over again, that would be a very severe thing to do. But it would certainly bring Qantas's labour costs more in line with its competitors than they are today.
Okay, let's turn to Virgin. Jayne Hrdlicka has run the airline, the carrier, for the last 4 years since Bain purchased it. What's the prognosis for it? How is that performing at the moment? And what do you think about an IPO? Do you think there's room in the market for it?
Look, I do. I mean, what Jayne and Bain have done, and through the administration and receivership of Virgin Australia, is they have stripped away all the excesses that were put in there in the prior 5 or 6 years. So all the frills, or most of the frills, are gone, and the fleet has been rationalised to basically one mainline type, the 737, and so they have repositioned it. They've still got a great product. They've still got fabulous cabin crew and fabulous customer service interface. From that perspective, it's really good. So it's a much leaner operation, and I think it's primed for an IPO. And I believe that they will go down the route of buying some international aircraft, probably 787s, a fleet of those, to start flying internationally in their own right. And I believe that one of the gentlemen on the advisory board, the safety advisory board, Ed Sims, who has amazing credentials in the airline industry, he will become the replacement for Jayne Hrdlicka.
Okay, heard it here first. What about the other airlines? Now, I grew up in Orange and my family were family friends with the Hazeltons. Max Hazelton is a legendary aviator in Australia. It's now part of Rex. Hazelton Airlines became part of Rex, along with Kendall, etc. Is there room for a third airline like that, and let alone the subsidiaries of some of the global players who are also flying?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, in that parliamentary inquiry we had last year, we had people saying we should break up Qantas and, break it up into 2 or 3 airlines, which is just crazy. Look, we are challenging the size of our market by adding more airlines. Now, Rex, which is the airline that came out of the Hazelton Kendall dynasty, that's got a really great regional footprint, now operating 737s. I think they've got 10 altogether, or they will have 10 very shortly, and they want to expand it further. And I think there's a really good market for them, and they've carved it out. The Bonza airline is a totally different operation, connecting other point to point that are not currently connected. I think the market is just right the way it is, and I'd like to see Virgin increase their market share. I'd like to see Qantas decrease its market share, but at the same time it would grow as the market grows. I would like to see Virgin pick up that growth, or more of that growth.
Okay, the $64 question for all of us who fly and search online for the cheapest airfares. What will happen to airfares both domestically and international globally over the next 12 months or so?
Oh, they're definitely going to go down, no question about it. For instance, for Australia, we've got all sorts of airlines that are still coming back to this country. Out of Perth, for instance, Thai International is returning for the first time at the end of March. South African Airways is returning for the first time at the end of March. Cathay Pacific, that used to have 10 services a day into Perth, 10 services a week into Perth, has just, as of a couple of weeks ago, got up to a daily service. So there's lots of capacity still to come back. And Qantas itself is still waiting for some A380s. So it's also waiting for capacity. So fares will come down with that capacity and they'll continue to decline. I mean, apart from this COVID blip, airfares continue to decline in relation to average weekly earnings, and they've been doing so ever since man and woman first stepped foot on an aeroplane. It's just all to do with engine technology and efficiencies within the airline industry.
What an upbeat way to finish the chat. Jeffrey, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
It's a pleasure.
That was aviation commentator Jeffrey Thomas, editor-in-chief of Airline Ratings, with an S, airlineratings.com. This is the Fear and Greed business interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's best business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.